The rain fell softly over the bustling streets of downtown. Samantha stood in the vibrant lobby of her office building, her favorite blue heels echoing on the marble floor as she walked. She had just finished a meeting that left her feeling energized and optimistic. But that feeling quickly began to shift the moment her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from James, her assistant, asking for a moment of her time. She thought, shrugging it off while heading to her office. As she entered, James was already waiting, his face filled with concern. "Samantha, we need to talk about the complaint," he said, his voice tight. Samantha frowned and settled into her chair, leaning back against the plush leather. "It's about Mark. He says you keep interrupting him in meetings." Samantha let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Interrupting Mark, that's a joke. He tends to dominate conversations." James shifted uncomfortably. I know, but Mark is adamant. Mediation." "For just speaking up, that seems excessive," she replied, crossing her arms defensively. James looked taken aback. "I think it would be smart to take it seriously." Rolling her eyes, Samantha snapped, "This is ridiculous." With that, she waved James off, dismissing the issue as if it were a pesky fly. "Let HR handle it. I'm too busy to deal with this right now," she added, brushing hair behind her ear dismissively. As the day dragged on, Samantha tried to focus on her work, but anxiety seeped in. A tiny nagging thought whispered that this might be more serious than she wanted to admit. The complaint hung over her like a dark cloud, but she pushed it aside, reminding herself how hard she had worked to rise to this level. Finally, it was time for her lunch break. Samantha decided to take a stroll to clear her mind. The rain had stopped and the sun was peeking through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the city. She felt lighter with each step, the fresh air invigorating her spirit. But as she reached the cafe on the corner, her heart sank. There they were, a throng of paparazzi waiting outside. Cameras snapped like the rapid fire of gunshots, relentless and glaring, catching the attention of passers-by. She had seen them around before, but this time they looked focused on someone specific. She wondered aloud, suddenly intrigued. There was a commotion outside the cafe. A hush fell over the crowd as a familiar face stepped out, flanked by a couple of bodyguards. It was Mark. His signature smirk was plastered across his face, and for a moment Samantha felt frozen. A wave of unease washed over her. Why was he outside, and why were these photographers waiting for him? She remembered the meeting just the other day when he had joked about using his social connections to get ahead. But this felt different. As she stood at the glass door watching him pose, her thoughts spiraled. It wasn't just a minor grievance anymore. Mark was reveling in the attention, soaking up the flashes and admiration. There was something mesmerizing and terrifying about it all. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. It was James texting her. "You should get back soon." The weight of reality came crashing down on her. She felt powerless against this wave of image and perception. Did she really want to go back? The day had turned on its head, and her staged confidence felt like a farce. At that moment, the implications of Mark's complaint struck her like a thunderbolt. What if he spun this narrative to his advantage? What if this was part of a strategy to reshape his image while tarnishing hers? She could feel her heart racing as she mulled over the possibilities. But then another thought pushed through the panic. Maybe this was an opportunity. What if she could confront him directly about the complaint? She had often been told that taking control of a narrative could change everything. If she went to HR with her side of the story, could she turn the tide in her favor? Making a quick decision, she took a deep breath and stepped outside the cafe to confront Mark. Cameras clicked, all eyes were on her. Mark noticed her just as she approached, a glimmer of recognition crossing his face. Well, if it isn't moving violation, Samantha," he joked lightly, a look of mock surprise playing on his lips. "Congrats on the attention, Mark," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Just a little photo op," he smirked, adjusting his cuffs as if rehearsed. Samantha stepped closer, her heart pounding. She asked, her words dripping with confidence. He feigned surprise, continuing to smile at the cameras. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied coyly, but she caught a flicker of annoyance dance in his eyes. "Really, a complaint to HR?" The crowd fell silent, drawn in by her tone. He shrugged, "Just trying to get my voice heard." "Getting your voice heard, it feels more like manipulating the narrative to suit you," she shot back, clenching her fists. The photographers buzzed with interest, sensing drama in the air. They captured every moment, and Samantha could feel the tension shift. This was her fight now. Mark's expression turned serious, a mask slipping. "You think this is a game? People don't see what happens behind the scenes, Samantha," she challenged. He blinked, clearly unnerved. "Look, this isn't about you." Samantha felt the adrenaline course through her. Respect is earned. In that moment, she saw his facade crack. Behind the confidence was a man who was terrified of losing his grip, fighting to shape his own narrative as much as she was. As the cameras clicked furiously, she realized something powerful. By confronting him, she had taken back a part of her story. Perhaps the complaint didn't define her, it was how she responded that mattered most. "Mark," she said, her voice lower but firm, "I refuse to let this complaint or your stunts control my narrative." With that, she turned on her heels and walked back towards the office. It felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted, leaving behind a renewed sense of purpose. The murmurs of the crowd faded to background noise, and as she entered the office building, she found solace in the normalcy that surrounded her. Later that day, HR called her in for a meeting. As she walked into the neutral-colored room, she was no longer the unsure employee anxious about a complaint. She was empowered. "Let's discuss this situation," the HR manager began, but Samantha didn't wait. She laid out the facts, recounted her interaction with Mark, and spoke to her side of the story with conviction. The HR manager exchanged glances with the other representative present, visibly impressed. "Thank you for your honesty, Samantha." In that moment, Samantha understood something profound. No one could take away her voice unless she allowed them to. This was her narrative, and she was determined to write it her way. The next day, she opened her phone to a flood of news articles. Mark's photo was everywhere, but so was the story of the confrontation, framed in a completely different light than the complaint. Samantha read the headlines, her heart swelling with pride. "Samantha challenges colleague in public face-off," one said. The very situation meant to undermine her had turned into an opportunity. People were now talking about her bravery and leadership. That's when she knew she had found her strength, her resolve in the story. She rose from the ashes, not as a victim, but as a warrior navigating through a world of shadows, refusing to be silenced. The moment she confronted Mark was the moment everything shifted. The thunder storming overhead had brought her clarity, igniting a spark of empowerment she didn't know she had. Samantha took a deep breath, a renewed sense of purpose coursing through her. She was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that her story was far from over. The loud chatter of the office was suddenly pierced by an urgent knock on the door. Samantha looked up from her computer screen, bewildered. Were they really about to stir the pot again with another complaint? Just when she thought the day couldn't get any more irritating, in walked James, her assistant, his face tense. Her heart sank. Mark was the office's resident complainer, a man who seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights of dissatisfaction. She asked, already bracing herself for another absurd situation. "It's serious," James replied, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to eavesdrop. "He's officially filed a complaint with HR." Samantha let out a short laugh, trying to mask her frustration. "Interrupt, please. If anything, I'm trying to get a word in edgewise." "Yes, but that doesn't matter right now. He's got a point. You might come off as aggressive," James said delicately, as if discussing a powder keg. Samantha narrowed her eyes. "Aggressive, because I'm trying to make valid points." James shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between loyalty and concern. "I just think you should take this a bit more seriously." As the words hung in the air, a chill slid down her spine. Maybe it was because she had fought hard to earn her position, or perhaps it was because she knew the impact of public perception. She leaned back in her chair, contemplating the silent repercussions of being viewed as the difficult one. "You can't ignore HR, Samantha." Samantha waved him off dismissively. "Let them talk." She stood up, pacing the room, trying to shake off the growing anxiety. If they want to mediate, then let them. The clock ticking on the wall felt louder as she turned her focus back to her work. The thought of facing HR only added to her unease. But right now, she had pressing reports to finish, and she was determined to shield herself from any thoughts that might spiral out of control. Her lunch break soon arrived, and she decided to step outside for a breath of fresh air. The bustling energy of the city enveloped her, and for a moment, she managed to forget the clouds hanging over her head. A soft breeze brushed against her skin as she entered a small cafe, the smell of warm pastries hanging in the air like a hug. But her little moment of peace was abruptly shattered. As she approached the counter, she caught sight of a cluster of photographers outside, their cameras raised, clicking rhythmically with the energy of startled birds. She wondered, curiosity piquing her interest. Suddenly, the cafe door swung open and out stepped Mark, a grin plastered across his face. He basked in the attention, waving like a rock star to the flashing cameras. The melee of whispers and speculations settled over the cafe like a thick fog. Samantha stood frozen, staring at him. Is he really soaking this in? It became clear. Mark was not just enjoying the fame, he was manipulating the narrative, transforming himself from the office complainant to some kind of misunderstood victim. It felt like a slap to her face. In that moment, she could sense something ticking inside her, a mix of anger and disbelief. How could he, of all people, turn this situation into a spectacle? She could not just stand by and let him rewrite the story. As the crowd around him grew, some people took out their phones to capture the moment. Mark laughed and tossed his hair back dramatically, making it all look staged, like he was in on some grand performance. Samantha made a split-second decision, one that sent adrenaline pulsing through her veins. She pushed through the cafe doors, the air suddenly thick with anticipation. The flash of cameras grew brighter, illuminating her as she approached Mark. She called out, her voice slicing through the noise, drawing attention like a magnet. He turned, surprise briefly flickering across his face before that trademark smirk returned. "Samantha, what a surprise," she shot back, her tone sharp. The buzz fell silent, the crowd captivated by the exchange. Mark opened his mouth, but she pressed on, fueled by a mix of indignation and confidence. "You file a complaint like a child and then pose like this. You're not a victim." Mark's grin faltered just for a moment. "You don't understand, Samantha. It's not just about you or me." "Is that what you call it?" she challenged. His expression hardened and a flicker of anger crossed his face. He was cornered. "Careful how far you go with this." The photographers saw the tension and began snapping photos faster, the atmosphere thick with expectation. Samantha could feel the whirlwind of emotions inside her: rage, defiance, and even a hint of fear, but her resolve hardened. "Mark," she said, lowering her voice but keeping it steady, "the only reputation in danger here is yours. All of this is just smoke and mirrors." For a brief moment, she almost felt sorry for him. She could see how desperately he wanted to be accepted, admired, but she couldn't let that stop her. It was a chance to reclaim her narrative, to show that strength wasn't just about how you carried yourself in public, but how you stood your ground when it mattered. Before he could respond, she turned on her heel and retraced her steps back into the cafe, knowing that she had sparked something for better or worse. As she entered, her heart raced, not out of fear but from exhilaration. The reality of the situation hit her. This was no longer just about a complaint. This was a battle over perception, a fight for control over their professional lives. When she returned to her desk, she faced a sea of messages and notifications. The incident had made its rounds on social media and news outlets. The headlines read. She felt a mixture of pride and apprehension, but the unbelievable part was that she hadn't just stood up for herself. She had shown that she wouldn't be silenced or manipulated. As the hours passed, the buzz of the day only amplified. Soon enough, HR called her in for a meeting, her stomach twisting in knots. Sitting across from the HR representatives, she took a deep breath, reminding herself to maintain composure. She started, her voice steady. The HR manager cleared his throat. "Yes, we've been made aware of the incident outside." His gaze was piercing, the kind that seemed to unravel your thoughts. "I'm glad you asked," Samantha replied, leaning forward slightly. "This complaint isn't just about me. It's about our culture and the way we communicate. Mark wants to present himself as a victim, but the truth is he's not." The HR representatives exchanged glances, intrigued. One of them asked. When Mark filed his complaint, it was less about his feelings and more about his personal agenda. As she spoke, she felt the confidence swelling inside her. This situation wasn't just the consequence of someone's inappropriate behavior. It was about acknowledging her value in the office and demanding respect. "We appreciate your perspective, Samantha," the HR manager finally said, his voice sounding more professional than ever. With that, they wrapped up the meeting, and as she walked out, Samantha felt a flood of relief. She hadn't just defended herself, she had taken that complaint and redefined its implications. The next day, as she scrolled through her social media feeds, the headlines grew louder. It felt surreal. People were talking about her willingness to confront the status quo. She was being hailed as a champion of workplace integrity. That's when she understood. Standing up didn't mean being aggressive, it meant being unwavering in your truth. The interaction with Mark had become a moment that not only changed the opinion of her colleagues, but forged a stronger sense of self. This was not just her story anymore. It was about resilience and the power of voice. She breathed deeply, feeling a weight lift as she stared at her reflection in the office window. No longer was she the timid employee anxious about a complaint. She was the fearless woman confronting obstacles head-on, ready to shape her own destiny, one powerful moment at a time. The clock on the wall ticked ominously as Samantha sat in the boardroom, her fingers drumming nervously against the polished mahogany table. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and she could feel her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Just across from her sat Mark, a colleague known for his knack for complaints and a flair for the dramatic. She asked, incredulity slipping into her voice. "This is a team meeting, Mark." He leaned back in his chair, a smug look on his face, arms crossed defiantly. "Exactly, everyone except me. You keep cutting me off, Samantha." Samantha felt her cheeks flush. All she could think was how he routinely dominated every discussion with his endless monologues. Was she really the issue here? She shot back, her tone sharper than she intended. Then she realized what was happening. This wasn't just about her speaking style. Mark was on some kind of mission. He was out to paint himself as the victim, the martyr in this corporate saga. "I'm going to escalate this to HR," he said nonchalantly, his smugness radiating through the room. "I'm tired of being interrupted." Samantha could hardly believe what she was hearing. "Go ahead, Mark," she said, her tone steady despite the storm swirling inside her. "Playing the card, this is about respect," he replied, the hint of desperation creeping into his voice. Samantha rolled her eyes. As the words left her mouth, she felt a sudden burst of adrenaline. The meeting ended, and Samantha walked out with a mix of anger and disbelief. How far was he willing to take this? The thought burrowed into her mind, feeding her anxiety. She didn't want to waste time dealing with HR over something so trivial. As the workday progressed, the tension of the morning clung to her like a heavy cloak. Wanting to escape the gloom, she decided to take her lunch break early. Stepping outside, she breathed in the fresh air as if it were the first drop of rain after a long drought. But as she crossed the street toward her favorite cafe, she froze in her tracks. A cluster of photographers stood outside, snapping photos of someone with a fervor usually reserved for A-list celebrities. She wondered, peering closer, curiosity piqued, and then she saw him. Mark, casually leaning against the cafe's wall, flashing his trademark smile. The cameras were hovering around him, capturing every moment as if he were the star of the show. For a heartbeat, she felt a jolt of disbelief wash over her. He was milking this moment for all it was worth. Wasn't he the very person who had just played the martyr in their meeting? A wave of anger surged through her. He was turning a complaint into a spectacle, manipulating the narrative to gain sympathy and attention. All the indignation from the earlier meeting ignited a fierce determination within her. She couldn't allow him to rewrite the story, especially not in a way that painted her as the villain. With renewed purpose, she forged ahead, her heels clicking against the pavement, every step fueled by defiance. She called out before she even reached him, her voice gaining strength. The cameras turned, eager to capture this unexpected confrontation. His eyes lit up with surprise, a combination of delight and annoyance swirling across his face. "Samantha, didn't expect to see you here," he said, feigning innocence. "Well, it looks like you're having quite the party," she retorted, glancing at the sea of flashing cameras. "Oh, just sharing my experiences, helping others understand workplace dynamics," he replied, a thin smile plastered on his face. "Really, it sounds more like a publicity stunt to me," she shot back, refusing to back down. The crowd seemed to shift, intrigued by the unfolding drama. Mark's facade was cracking just a bit, he said, his tone dropping. Samantha crossed her arms, stealing a moment to gauge his reaction. A game, if it's a game, why not play it fairly? As she spoke, she realized the photographers were capturing every word, their lenses focused on the clash between spiraling egos. This wasn't just a casual encounter anymore, it became an epic show of defiance and bravery. "Listen, my reputation doesn't hinge on how you view me," Mark shot back, visibly rattled now. "Then why are you outside basking in the attention?" "It's ironic, isn't it? You're the one claiming to be disrespected while you're flaunting it in front of the very people you want to convince," she countered, sensing the victory just within reach. His composure was slipping, the world he had meticulously crafted beginning to crumble. She scoffed. "This is about patterns of behavior, Mark." He opened his mouth, but for the first time the words seemed to fail him. Samantha could see the internal struggle, a man caught between his desire for fame and the collapsing edifice of his victimhood. In that electrifying moment, with cameras flashing and crowds watching, she realized she could redefine the narrative. She didn't just want to respond, she wanted to reclaim her power. "You didn't just try to file a complaint," she said, softened by that knowledge. "You set a trap." The tide had turned and the energy shifted. Mark's bravado melted away, replaced by uncertainty. He glanced around, probably calculating how this would look in the headlines. As she walked away, she felt a surge of liberation. This was her moment, not just to stand up against Mark, but to demonstrate the power of owning your truth without fear of consequence. The office buzzed with whispers the next day. Pictures of the encounter flooded social media, with headlines that painted their showdown in dramatic strokes. "Woman confronts colleague's public display for sympathy," they read, accompanied by images of them in the heat of discourse. Certainly not a conventional narrative, but powerful nonetheless. Samantha stepped into the office, her heart pounding not from fear but from exhilaration. She could feel the shift in energy all around her. Colleagues who once whispered about her behind closed doors now stole glances of admiration. Later that afternoon, HR called her in for a meeting, and the tension was palpable as she entered the room. The representative sat across from her, their expressions serious but curious. "We've seen the news and social media posts," one of them said, leaning forward. She took a deep breath, the weight of the last few days invigorating her. "Thank you for asking." The HR representatives exchanged looks, intrigued by her confidence. "Continue," they urged, leaning back in their chairs. "I've been in meetings with Mark where he dominates the conversation. This isn't really about my communication skills, but his need to maintain control," she said, noting how their eyes widened in understanding. "Understanding communication dynamics is crucial," another representative chimed in, nodding. As Samantha spoke, the dull ache of anxiety transformed into a roar of confidence. This was more than just a complaint, it was a testament to her growth, a journey towards self-awareness and empowerment. The meeting wrapped up, and as she stepped out, she felt lighter than she had in days. Just as she was about to sit back at her desk, her phone buzzed with notifications. The headlines were relentless. "Samantha redefines workplace dynamics, the power of speaking up," one article read. A smile crept over her face. She hadn't just won this battle, she had sparked a conversation that rippled through the office. As the glow of sunlight spilled in through the office windows, Samantha felt a rush of inspiration. In a world that often pushed women to the background, her moment had forged a connection, bringing forth the power of owning one's narrative, of transforming strife into strength. No longer was she simply the woman who turned down a complaint. She had become a voice for change, and the threads of her impact were only just beginning to unfold. Samantha knew she was not done yet. She was standing at the precipice of something greater, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously as Samantha sat in the dimly lit conference room, her palms sweaty against the cold metal table. Across from her, Mark leaned back, his casual demeanor concealing a simmering tension. The atmosphere buzzed with unspoken stakes, and it felt like the tension between them could snap at any moment. "I'm done being ignored in meetings, Samantha. You keep cutting me off when I try to share my ideas," Mark said, his voice firm and unwavering, but with an edge of desperation creeping in. Samantha raised an eyebrow, disbelief washing over her like a cold wave. "Cutting you off, Mark, you talk over everyone." His expression hardened, brows furrowing as if he had been dealt a harsh blow. "That's not how it feels to me. I'm going to escalate this to HR." Her heart thudded loudly in her chest. How was this even happening? Mark had always had a knack for turning situations into dramas, but this was on another level. She shot back, her voice steady but laced with incredulity. Mark echoed, his voice rising as he leaned forward. "This isn't just about me, it's about the culture of our team." Samantha's anger flared like a dormant volcano awakening. Toxic, really. With a sidelong glance, she could almost see the gears turning in his mind, calculating how to spin this to his advantage. "I'm just saying, Samantha." She inhaled deeply, trying to rein in her mounting frustration. "You have no idea how hard I've worked to earn my place here." Mark folded his arms, clearly enjoying the confrontation. The meeting ended with a tense silence, and Samantha stormed out, her mind racing. How could he twist the narrative like that? She felt the world slipping slightly out of her grasp, and her gut churned with a mix of anger and disbelief. After a long morning, she decided to step outside for some fresh air. The city buzzed around her, the sounds of honking cars and chatter creating a chaotic symphony. She walked aimlessly, trying to shake off the tension. But as she approached her favorite cafe, something caught her eye. A throng of photographers stood outside, cameras at the ready, sensors flickering like tiny stars trying to pierce through a dark sky. She wondered aloud, squinting her eyes to see. And there he was, Mark, strutting out of the cafe with the confidence of a man who had just won a grand prize. Cameras flashed wildly as he posed, wearing a smile that could launch 1,000 ships. The absurdity of it all made her stop in her tracks. She murmured, disbelief washing over her. He had turned a mere complaint into a spectacle. She thought, indignation boiling up inside her. Gone was the wounded colleague she had seen just an hour earlier. Here stood a man relishing the spotlight. Suddenly, the realization hit her like a freight train. Mark was trying to paint her as the villain, and this was his way of rallying public support. She could not let him spin this narrative unchecked. Tossing the weight of her unease aside, she made her way toward him, her heart pounding. "Mark," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. The cameras shifted to her, their lenses capturing every moment like predatory birds honing in on their target. He turned, an eyebrow raised, surprise flickering across his face. "Samantha, what a surprise, didn't expect to see you here," he said with a forced cheerfulness that felt all too contrived. "Oh, I can see you're enjoying your moment," she shot back, refusing to be swayed by his bravado. "This, just shedding light on important workplace dynamics," he said, waving his hands theatrically. She scoffed. The photographers buzzed with excitement, their cameras rapidly snapping as the tension escalated. She felt the energy shift, people were leaning in, captivated by their exchange. This was no longer just a conversation, it was a stage, and they were the stars. Mark challenged, his smile faltering. "Aggressive, I'm standing up for myself. You're the one playing victim for attention," she countered, feeling a surge of power course through her. In the midst of the unfolding drama, she recognized how important this moment was, not just for her, but for others who might be facing similar situations. They had the chance to challenge the narratives that tried to belittle them. "Let's be real, Mark. You can't manipulate this situation to paint yourself as the good guy. You're just afraid of losing control," she said, letting her words land heavy in the air. His expression darkened, and for a moment she could see the cracks in his facade. The allure of the spotlight was fading as he realized that the truth had a way of piercing through all the bravado. "Samantha, you don't understand," he started, but she cut him off. "No, Mark, you don't understand. Respect is earned. It's not about complaining, it's about growth." The gathering crowd appeared captivated, hanging onto her every word. Mark's confidence had wavered, and he stood there, momentarily speechless. "You want to file a complaint, fine, but don't expect a parade on your way out," she declared, taking one last look at him before stepping back. The world outside their little confrontation felt bigger somehow, as if she had unshackled herself from a weight she didn't even know she was carrying. As she walked away, the buzz of conversation filled the air around her. The moment felt electric, charging her with a newfound sense of self. She had done something radical, she had spoken up, and in doing so reshaped the narrative. Back at the office, whispers of their confrontation danced through the air. Everyone seemed eager to discuss it. The very thing Mark had aimed to use against her had turned into a rallying cry for others who felt silenced. Days passed, and the impact of that encounter rippled through the office. Samantha received messages of support from colleagues, sharing how much courage it took to confront Mark. Each note bolstered her strength, confirming that standing up mattered, but the inevitable meeting with HR loomed large over her. She arrived that fateful afternoon, the anxiety creeping in as she stepped into the brightly lit room filled with stern but curious faces. "Samantha, thank you for coming in. We'd like to discuss the events surrounding your public encounter with Mark," the HR manager said, her expression unreadable. Samantha inhaled deeply, then spoke with confidence. "I believe this situation is about more than just a simple complaint." The representatives listened closely, their attention fixed as she elaborated. "It became clear to me that Mark was not just expressing feelings, he was trying to manipulate perceptions." The room remained silent, but she could see understanding reflected in their faces. "We appreciate your candor, Samantha. It takes courage to stand up in a way that fosters dialogue," one of the HR representatives said, nodding slowly. With each word that escaped her lips, she felt the walls of anxiety crumble. This was her chance to not only defend herself, but to instigate real change. She wasn't just an employee, she was a force for progress. As the meeting drew to a close, she walked out with a sense of exhilaration. The anxiety that once clutched at her heart melted away, replaced by a fierce determination. This was no longer just about her fight, it was a larger conversation that needed to happen. That evening she returned home, scrolling through social media, and saw the headlines flooding in. They painted her actions in bold strokes, and she felt a sense of weightlessness. Not just me, she thought, realizing the impact of her story was far bigger than she ever envisioned. How often had others stifled their voices, fearing repercussions? The next day she arrived at the office to a subtly different atmosphere. People glanced her way not just with admiration, but with a newfound respect. She recognized the shift, others were finding their voices too. Weeks turned into months, and the seeds of change rooted deeply within the office culture. Meetings became more inclusive, and people began to share their thoughts openly without fear of dismissal. Samantha reveled in the transformation, embracing her role as a catalyst for change. She found herself speaking up in places where silence once reigned, and others began to follow suit. The echo of her confrontation with Mark became a lesson, one that she shared openly during brown bag lunches, hoping to inspire others to stand tall and speak their truths. As she sat at her desk one day, reflecting on her journey, the realization struck her. The power to shape narratives lay not just within the walls of a conference room or the glare of cameras, but in the hearts of those willing to stand up for what was right. The memory of Mark outside that cafe faded, but the lessons remained vivid. Samantha had turned a moment of conflict into an opportunity for growth, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. In a world that often tried to dictate who had a voice, she had proven that speaking your truth was a radical act, and it was a call to action. And as she continued to navigate her career, she carried with her that unyielding spirit, the spirit of someone who had faced the storm and emerged, not just unbroken, but brighter than ever. The glass doors of the conference room swung open, and Samantha felt her heart race as she stepped inside. It was an ordinary day in the office, but everything was about to change. Seated at the long table were the HR representatives, their expressions serious and expectant. Just across from them sat Mark, the colleague whose complaints had stirred up a whirlwind of emotions. "I want to file a complaint against Samantha," Mark began, his voice surprisingly calm, as if he were reading from a script. "She keeps interrupting me during meetings." A wave of disbelief washed over Samantha. She had always known Mark to dominate conversations, his voice booming over anyone else's, but here he was, painting himself as the victim. She interjected, her voice firm. "You think this is about you being disrespected?" The HR manager raised a finger, urging her to stay calm. With that, the meeting took on a surreal quality, each second stretching longer than the last. It was as if they were actors in a drama, each role carefully defined, Mark as the innocent victim and Samantha as the aggressor. A psychological game was unfolding, and she suddenly felt trapped within it. "I'm not here to attack you, Samantha," Mark continued, his tone deceptively soft. "I just want to make sure our conversations are equitable." "Oh please, Mark, I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is about equity," she retorted, her frustration boiling over. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. She could see the HR representatives glancing at one another, weighing the situation. This wasn't just about a complaint, this was about power and perception in the workplace. Samantha felt the gravity of it all, like a heavy anchor weighing her down. The meeting ended on a tense note, leaving her in a daze. With every step back to her desk, the reality sunk in deeper. How could he twist this narrative to frame her as the villain? After a long afternoon, Samantha needed an escape. The city was alive with energy, and she decided to take a break. As she stepped outside, the fresh air hit her like a wave, invigorating and refreshing her spirits. But as she approached her usual cafe, she noticed something odd. A crowd had gathered, and in the center stood Mark, basking in the glow of flashing cameras. Photographers were snapping pictures like bees to honey, capturing every moment of his beaming smile. What the? She thought, her heart racing. He had turned the mundane drama of a workplace complaint into a spectacle. He stood there, reveling in the attention as if he were a movie star. Disbelief washed over her. Was this his plan all along? Samantha felt a surge of adrenaline pulsing through her veins. She could not let him twist the narrative any further. This had spiraled way out of control, and she needed to confront him to take her power back. She called, her voice cutting through the chaos. People turned, their heads snapping toward her as cameras pivoted, eager to capture this unexpected moment. He turned, a glint of surprise flashing in his eyes. "Samantha," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She shot back, her words flying out before she could think. The crowd leaned in, clearly entertained. "This," Mark said dramatically, gesturing with his hands, enjoying the spotlight. "Awareness," she replied, her voice steady and unfaltering. The silence fell over the crowd, the intensity sharp. Mark opened his mouth to speak but faltered. He had expected sympathy and support, but all he faced was her unyielding gaze. "You've turned a workplace complaint into a public spectacle, Mark." Samantha pressed, feeling the power of the moment surge within her. She could see the facade starting to crumble, his confident smile giving way to something more vulnerable. "This isn't about me, it's about respect," he insisted, but the earlier fervor in his voice began to wane. "Respect," she shot back. The crowd was transfixed, whispering among themselves. The earlier entertainment factor had morphed into something far more significant. In that moment, Samantha was speaking not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt silenced. Mark challenged, his voice rising again as desperation seeped in. "Feelings aren't enough," she said, her voice calming yet firm. "This is about accountability. You're using your feelings to avoid responsibility." His expression faltered, guilt creeping into his eyes. The lights of the cameras flickered intensely, documenting the reality of the situation. No longer was he the boastful colleague, he was just a man caught trying to twist the truth. With one last look, she turned on her heel and walked away, feeling liberated. The world around her felt vibrant and alive. The confrontation was exhilarating, a powerful reminder that her voice mattered. Back in the office, the whispers had morphed into conversations. Colleagues approached her, expressing admiration for her confidence. She was surprised by the outpouring of support that had risen in the wake of the confrontation. It slowly dawned on her that the moment had rippled throughout the office, creating a wave of awareness about speaking up and standing firm. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere in the office shifted. Meetings transformed into open forums where everyone felt encouraged to share their ideas. Each time someone spoke, it felt like a little victory. The oppressive culture of fear was dissipating, replaced by an environment fostering inclusion and collaboration. But the HR meeting loomed overhead like a storm cloud. The day finally arrived, and as she walked into the brightly lit room filled with serious faces, anxiety crept in. A sense of uncertainty nestled in her stomach, but she forced herself to breathe. "We've reviewed the details of the situation and would like to discuss your public encounter with Mark," the HR manager said, looking at her intently. Samantha nodded, her heart racing. "Thank you for taking the time to hear this," she said, holding her head high. "The complaint Mark filed didn't just concern me." One of the representatives leaned forward. "This encounter is a microcosm of the larger issue at hand. It highlights how voices can be manipulated in a toxic environment," she began, feeling each word resonate within her. Samantha spoke passionately about their office dynamics, unveiling layers of discontent that had long been buried. "I confronted him not just for myself, but for anyone who feels like they don't have a platform to speak." The HR representatives listened intently, their expressions thoughtful. For the first time, she felt heard in a way that transcended mere acknowledgement. Her voice was invigorating, sparking a sense of possibility within the walls of the corporate structure. As the meeting concluded, Samantha left the room feeling unburdened. The knot of anxiety unraveled, replaced by a profound sense of strength. This wasn't just about compliance or following protocol. It was about moving forward, taking ownership of her story, and inspiring others to do the same. The weeks continued, and the momentum around workplace conversations blossomed. The energy was palpable. Samantha noticed people engaging more, encouraging one another to express themselves even if the stakes felt high. And as the sunlight streamed through the office windows, illuminating her desk, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey she had taken. That initial confrontation with Mark had evolved into something substantial, something more significant than a singular complaint. It had become a movement, a collective voice rising up against the confines of silence. One afternoon, as she sat with colleagues in the break room, they began discussing their own experiences of feeling stifled. Samantha listened intently as stories poured out, each one echoing the self-doubt, the anxiety, the fear they had all felt in similar situations. "You know, it's empowering to see how we can change this," one colleague said, nodding toward Samantha. Samantha felt a warm rush of gratitude. This was not just her journey, but a shared one, and she was thankful to have sparked a fire that encouraged others to rise. Finally, a few months later, Samantha learned that the company would be implementing a new training program focused on fostering open communication. They would be addressing workplace dynamics, courtesy of the collective noise surrounding Mark's complaint. It felt so surreal that all of this had stemmed from one moment of confrontation. Standing before her peers during the launch event of the program, Samantha shared her story openly, weaving in the struggles and triumphs of the past months. As her voice resonated through the crowd, she felt empowered. The applause that erupted felt like a wave of recognition, a celebration of not just her courage, but also the courage of those who had shared their own stories. "I stand here today not just for myself, but for each one of you," she said, her voice strong and clear. As the crowd cheered, a sense of fulfillment washed over her. She had turned a workplace complaint into a rallying cry for change, transforming anxiety into action. Each time she looked back on her journey, Samantha understood one vital truth. The power of speaking up had the potential to reshape narratives and foster change. In a world where silence often reigned, she had become a beacon for those still finding their voice. And as the sun set on that day, casting a warm golden glow over the office, she felt incredibly proud. This was the beginning not just for her but for everyone ready to step into the light. This was her legacy, and it was just getting started. The sound of heels clicking against the polished floor echoed in the large boardroom, a space usually filled with chatter and camaraderie, now overshadowed by tension. Samantha sat at the long table, feeling the weight of anticipation pressing down on her. Across from her sat Mark, a colleague known for his grandstanding and theatrics. Today, however, he wore a grin that felt both triumphant and ominous. "Samantha, I need to address something that's been bothering me," he began, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of irritation. Her heart sank. She had an inkling where this was heading. "Go ahead, Mark." He leaned forward, his expression shifting to one of faux seriousness. "I've decided to file a formal complaint against you." Samantha's breath caught in her throat. She echoed, incredulity rising like a tide. "You can't be serious. You talk over everyone, Mark." His smile faded, replaced by a defensive frown. "It doesn't matter who talks the most. It's about creating a space where everyone feels respected." She felt her frustration boiling over. The tension in the room thickened, a palpable force that felt like it could snap. Mark's expression hardened. "I can't sit back and let you disrespect me in front of the entire team." Samantha clenched her fists, an overwhelming sense of injustice flooding her senses. This wasn't the first time Mark had tried to manipulate the narrative in his favor, but it was the most blatant. The very idea of him taking his complaint to HR was infuriating. It felt like an attempt to belittle her, to undermine her authority. "Fine, file your complaint," she snapped, standing up to leave. As she stormed out of the room, her mind was racing, overwhelmed with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could he twist the situation to his advantage? The weight of the encounter followed her throughout the afternoon, wrapping her in a shroud of anxiety and frustration. She needed a break. The city was alive when she stepped outside. People rushed by, their laughter melding with the sounds of honking cars. She took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs, hoping to clear her mind. Walking down the street, she found herself heading toward her favorite cafe, a cozy little corner known for its incredible lattes. But as she approached, her steps faltered. A crowd was gathering, photographers lined up with cameras at the ready, their lenses glistening in the mid-afternoon sun. Curiosity bubbled within her, but as she pushed closer, her stomach dropped. There, amidst the throng of cameras, stood Mark, grinning like a Cheshire cat. He was posing, soaking up the attention as if he were a celebrity. The flashes illuminated his face, and he looked absolutely at home in the spotlight. Samantha thought, a mix of disbelief and anger boiling inside her. It was surreal. He had turned his workplace complaint into a public spectacle, and in that moment, he transformed from an office drama queen to a media darling. Her heart raced as realization washed over her. Mark was using this moment to manipulate public perception, to paint himself as a victim and garner sympathy. She couldn't let him get away with it. She had to confront him to reclaim her narrative. She shouted, her voice cutting through the buzz of the crowd. She felt the eyes of the gathered spectators shift toward her, all attention now focused on the intersection of this drama. He turned, surprise flickering in his eyes before quickly morphing into a smirk. "Samantha," she asked, striding closer. He shrugged, feigning nonchalance, but she could see the cracks in his veneer. "I'm simply raising awareness about workplace respect." She scoffed, unable to hide her disdain. "This is just about your ego." The crowd murmured, the tension palpable. Mark's smile faltered, revealing a hint of anxiety beneath his bravado. "Come on, Samantha. You can't deny that a conversation needs to happen. What I'm doing isn't wrong," he argued, but his confidence was waning. "Mark, you're not the victim here, you're just playing games, manipulating the narrative to make yourself look good at the expense of those you claim to care about." Samantha shot back, the words spilling out with conviction. In that moment, something shifted. The crowd leaned in, captivated by the rising conflict. The journalist's cameras snapped eagerly, capturing this unexpected confrontation, and for a fleeting moment it felt like she was in a film, every dramatic angle amplified. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," Mark replied, his voice tinged with desperation. "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said, her resolve solidifying. "You want sympathy instead of accountability. You're trying to avoid facing the truth of your behavior, but this isn't going to work." The energy shifted. Mark realized he was losing control over the narrative. The cameras were no longer just on him. They were capturing the reality of his manipulation, peeling away the layers of pretense he had wrapped himself in. As she took a step back, she felt a rush of empowerment, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her. This had turned into much more than just a confrontation. It was a declaration of self-worth, a stand against the way he had tried to portray her. With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, her heart racing. Each step felt lighter, filled with an invigorating sense of purpose. She had taken back her power. Returning to the office, the atmosphere had shifted. Colleagues whispered, eyes following her as she walked to her desk. The buzz from the earlier confrontation lingered, and she couldn't help but feel emboldened by the outpouring of support emerging from unexpected corners. Over the next few days, the fallout from the incident unfolded like ripples in a pond. Conversations about workplace respect, something that had been simmering beneath the surface, began to bubble over. People were engaging more, sharing their thoughts and experiences, but the dreaded HR meeting loomed ahead. When the day arrived, Samantha felt the weight of uncertainty settle in. She entered the bright room where HR representatives sat with serious expressions. "It's about the incident with Mark," the HR manager said, looking straight at her. Samantha took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Thank you for allowing me to speak. I believe this incident transcended my complaint with Mark." The representatives nodded, interested. The room felt charged with anticipation. "I confronted Mark because I realized he was trying to manipulate the narrative. It was not just about me. It was about how we treat one another when we feel vulnerable," she continued, the words flowing steadily from her core. The HR manager leaned back, taking in her words. Samantha felt a wave of relief wash over her. "We need to foster an environment where everyone feels empowered to speak up without fear of retribution." She spoke passionately, igniting a fire that had burned within her since the confrontation. It felt liberating to share this vision, a palpable synergy filling the space, as if everyone in the room acknowledged that change was necessary. As the meeting wrapped up, Samantha walked out with a renewed sense of purpose. She had taken a stand, and it was clear she was not just impacting her own story, but potentially shaping the culture of her workplace for the better. Weeks turned into months, and Samantha noticed significant shifts. Their workplace meetings transformed into open dialogues where everyone felt encouraged to participate. There was a new sense of camaraderie, and for every triumphant moment when someone shared their ideas, she felt a sense of victory wash over her. One afternoon, she found herself sitting with a group of colleagues during lunch. The conversation flowed, stories of struggles and successes emerging organically. It felt safe, an environment built on mutual respect and understanding. "I just want to thank you for what you did," one of her colleagues said, their eyes filled with sincerity. "You made it okay for the rest of us to speak up." Samantha felt a swell of pride. "It wasn't just me. It was a collective effort to create a space where everyone felt valued," she replied, her heart swelling with gratitude. Eventually, her company decided to host a workshop focused on respectful communication and navigating difficult conversations. They invited professionals to discuss the importance of speaking up, and Samantha was asked to share her experience. Standing in front of her peers, she felt empowered. "What I learned through my confrontation with Mark was that our voices matter. It's okay to assert yourself, even if it feels uncomfortable," she spoke with conviction. With each story she shared, she could see her colleagues nodding, their expressions reflecting a deep understanding of the journey they had all taken together. She had become more than just an employee, she was a catalyst for change. As the room erupted in applause, a sense of closure washed over her. The battle she had fought wasn't simply about one incident. It had transformed into a movement, unraveling the very threads of complacency that once held them captive. Later, Samantha sat at her desk feeling a sense of calm wash over her. The tension that had once clouded her thoughts was a distant memory. What remained was a newfound confidence, a realization that she could shape her narrative, drawing strength from vulnerability and turning obstacles into opportunities. As she glanced out the window, the city buzzed with life, a vibrant reminder of resilience and possibility. She had navigated the storm and emerged stronger, a beacon of empowerment for others. This was just the beginning, and she was ready for whatever came next. The air in the conference room felt electric, thick with tension as Samantha settled into her chair. Across the table sat Mark, an ambitious but controversial colleague known for his underhanded tactics. Today, something was different. His usual bravado was tinged with an unsettling edge. "I'm going to file a formal complaint," he said, his voice unwavering, yet there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Samantha blinked, her surprise giving way to irritation. "Interrupting you, Mark, you dominate every meeting." He leaned back, crossing his arms defensively. "That's not how it feels to me. You're not just a colleague, you're a roadblock." Her heart raced. How had this shifted so quickly? Here they were, fighting over the narrative of their shared workspace, but somehow he was turning it into a personal vendetta. "This isn't about your feelings, Mark. It's about your patterns," she shot back, frustration bubbling over. "I'm going to HR with this," he replied with an air of finality, dismissing her outrage as if it were inconsequential. Samantha's mind reeled. How could he misconstrue a simple disagreement into a weapon? The feeling of being cornered ignited something fierce in her. Go ahead. With that, she stormed out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest, fist clenched as she processed what had just happened. Anger coursed through her like wildfire while uncertainty gnawed at her stomach. Was this how he wanted to play it? She spent the next hour lost in her thoughts, the weight of his complaint compressing her chest. Nausea bubbled beneath her carefully constructed facade, overwhelming her like a rising tide. When lunchtime came, she needed an escape. The streets buzzed with life outside, and the fresh air felt like a balm against the chaos in her mind. But as she turned the corner toward her favorite cafe, she stopped in her tracks. A crowd had gathered, and camera flashes lit up the scene like a strobe light. She wondered aloud while taking hesitant steps closer, and there he was, Mark, soaking up the attention like a star on a red carpet. He was flanked by reporters, with cameras pointed straight at him as he flashed a polished smile. It was surreal, almost absurd. How had this petty workplace drama turned into a media event? Samantha felt her heart drop. Did he really think he could twist a moment of conflict into a public relations victory? Was he out there claiming victimhood for attention? Anger surged through her as realization struck like lightning. She couldn't just let this slide. She shouted, the power of her voice surprising even herself. The crowd turned and cameras swiveled, capturing the moment. He turned his head, a flicker of surprise on his face that quickly transformed into his trademark smirk. Samantha, she echoed, incredulity spilling from her lips. What are you doing out here? What? I'm just raising awareness about workplace dynamics, he retorted, feigning innocence. Raising awareness, more like raising your profile, she shot back, the words flowing out with unexpected power. You've turned an office disagreement into a media spectacle. The crowd shifted, leaning in as the tension escalated. Mark's previously confident demeanor began to flicker. He hadn't expected her to confront him directly. Samantha, you don't understand. I'm just trying to make a point here, he said, his voice losing its certainty. She took a step closer, determined to reclaim her narrative. No, Mark, you're twisting a situation for your benefit. As she spoke, she could feel the energy of the crowd shift in her favor. The cameras snapped away, hungry for the unfolding drama. Mark's expression turned defensive. You can't just make me out to be the bad guy, he huffed. Bad guy, you're the one trying to play the victim. You've manipulated the narrative to suit your ego, she asserted, her voice rising above the shock of onlookers. In that moment, something shifted in the air. The collective breath the crowd held felt charged. The photographers busily captured every angle like a scene from a film. The moment had transformed from personal frustration to public revelation. You don't know the pressure I'm under, Mark stammered, his bravado slipping. Pressure, we all face pressure in this workplace, but using it to gain sympathy and attention, that's cowardice, plain and simple, Samantha responded, emboldened by the voices of others echoing in her head, those who had been cut off, silenced, ignored. The murmurs among the observers turned to whispers of admiration. People began to nod, some even cheering her on. In that moment, she felt a rush of clarity and strength she had never felt before. Not only was she standing up for herself, but she was also standing up for everyone who had ever felt belittled. Having realized he was losing control of the situation, Mark faltered. This isn't a game, he said, his voice weak. Oh, it's a game for you, and I refuse to play along, she declared before turning and walking away, each step feeling lighter than the last. Samantha returned to the office, unable to ignore the buzz of anticipation that met her. Colleagues glanced her way, some of them smiling, others whispering with newfound respect. The air felt charged, almost electric, as if her confrontation had opened a door, allowing others to step through with her. Days rolled on, and the fallout from that moment transformed the office dynamics. What began as an ordinary complaint had ignited a series of conversations. People felt emboldened to share their own experiences, each story adding another layer to the growing momentum. But the looming HR meeting weighed heavily on her mind. When the day finally arrived, Samantha entered the room, uneasy yet determined to confront whatever came next. The HR representative sat before her, expressions unreadable but their attention keen. Samantha, we wanted to discuss the incident involving you and Mark, the HR manager said, gesturing for her to sit. Taking a deep breath, she began to unravel the threads of her story. I realized that Mark wasn't just trying to file a complaint, he was trying to manipulate the narrative. The room fell silent as her words sank in. She felt the weight of her truth spilling forth, each sentence woven with the courage she had found during that public confrontation. We need to create an environment where the truth can be spoken without fear of retribution, Samantha continued, her voice growing stronger. The HR representatives exchanged glances, clearly digesting her perspective. One of them asked. Samantha leaned in, feeling the weight of the moment. We need workshops centered on open communication and respect. As the meeting wrapped up, Samantha left with a clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about fostering a work environment that valued open dialogue and connection. The weeks followed in a flurry of energy. Office meetings evolved from monotonous presentations to dynamic discussions where everyone participated. Colleagues began sharing their ideas without hesitation, breaking down walls that had long existed. One afternoon, while sitting with coworkers during lunch, they began discussing their own experiences of feeling unheard. A familiar blend of laughter and reflection filled the air, creating a bond that had been missing. "You really made me feel like it was safe to share," one colleague confessed, gratitude shining in her eyes. "I didn't do it alone," Samantha replied, her heart swelling. As months rolled on, a new training program focusing on effective communication and conflict resolution took root. There were workshops led by professionals who specialized in making workplaces more inclusive. Samantha was invited to share her experience at those workshops, inspiring others with her story. Standing before her peers during a session, she felt a rush of excitement. "I learned that speaking up isn't just about voicing your thoughts, it's about standing tall for everyone else who has been silenced," she said passionately. It was a cathartic experience. As she shared her journey, she saw nods of agreement and faces lighting up with recognition. The courage in her own words fueled the fire within everyone around her. At once she realized this wasn't just her story. It was a shared narrative, an evolving masterpiece they were all creating together. As she wrapped up her speech and the applause cascaded through the room, a surge of pride filled her heart. She had taken a tiny spark of conflict, the complaint, and ignited a whole movement of empowerment. Weeks blurred into months, and with each passing day, the workplace transformed. Meetings turned lively as individuals raised their hands not just in agreement, but in celebration of diverse perspectives. The change had taken root, and Samantha could feel the energy vibrating around her. One afternoon, while gazing out the window, she reflected on how far they had come. She had found her voice in a moment of conflict, and it had not only liberated her, but it had also resonated with everyone around her. It was a reminder that when one person stands up, it sends ripples through the fabric of the organization. As she prepared for another workshop session, standing before a room full of eager faces, Samantha felt a rush of gratitude. She was no longer merely an employee fighting for her truth, she had become a voice of change. And as the sun warmed the office, illuminating her path, she understood that this was just the beginning. Together, they had forged a new way of communicating, a new kind of respect. The narrative had shifted dramatically, and it was a profound reminder that every voice counts, and sometimes the loudest roars come from the hearts of those who were once silent. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway as Samantha marched toward the conference room, her mind swirling with doubts and indignation. Today was supposed to be just another Tuesday in the office, but it had quickly evolved into something far more intense. In the back of her mind, she already feared that his idea of seriousness was more about his melodrama than any honest conversation. As she pushed the door open, the atmosphere inside felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an unsettling glow on the faces of the HR representatives already seated at the long table. Mark sat opposite them, his posture a mix of bravado and bitterness. He looked up when she entered, a slight smirk curling at the corners of his lips. "Thanks for joining us, Samantha," he said, feigning delight, but the sharpness in his eyes betrayed him. She asked, trying to keep her tone steady. "It's about the meetings," he said, his voice dropping in volume as he leaned forward. "Specifically, how you consistently interrupt me." Samantha felt her stomach drop. She echoed incredulously, disbelief flooding her. "Are you really going to sit here and pretend that you're the victim in this?" His expression hardened, and she could almost see gears turning in his mind. "This isn't about who talks the most, Samantha." A sharp laugh escaped her. "Respect is earned, Mark. You think complaining to HR is going to earn you any?" He sat back, crossing his arms. "This is serious. I can't keep working in an environment where I feel belittled." As she stared into his eyes, a wave of anger and helplessness surged within her. Who was he to turn their professional discourse into a personal grievance? The meeting felt more like a stage play, with him acting out some role that he alone had scripted. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to weaponize discomfort." "I won't play along," she replied, her voice trembling with controlled fury. With that, she turned on her heel and left the conference room, her heart racing as she walked down the corridor. The fluorescent lights felt harsh overhead, and the walls seemed to close in. This wasn't just a petty office squabble, it was a direct challenge to her credibility. Outside, she took a deep breath, trying to ground herself in the reality of the situation. It was just another complaint, she reasoned. It would blow over, but something didn't sit right. An ominous weight pressed down on her chest. The fear that this might transform into something bigger loomed large in her mind. After a restless afternoon, she decided to step out for lunch, hoping the fresh air would clear her thoughts. Inhaling deeply, she felt the street's vibrant energy wrap around her like an embrace. But as she strolled toward her favorite cafe, a peculiar sight froze her in her tracks. Photographers stood clustered outside, their cameras focused eagerly on someone within the cafe. Curious, she moved closer, her heart pounding. And there he was, Mark. He stood outside, hands in his pockets, laughing and chatting with a group of admirers, his earlier demeanor completely evaporated. The glow from the camera flashes illuminated his face, almost as if he were a celebrity soaking up the limelight. The scene felt surreal, almost cartoonish. Samantha whispered under her breath, confusion and anger stirring within her. Was he really capitalizing on this absurd complaint? As if sensing her presence, Mark turned slightly and caught her gaze. His smile widened, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. It was as if he had orchestrated this entire situation, manipulating it into a public relations victory. Adrenaline surged through her veins. She had to confront him. She would not let him transform this petty dispute into a media spectacle without standing up for herself. She called out, her voice slicing through the cacophony of laughter and chatter. Everyone turned to look as she pushed through the gathering crowd, determination fueling each step. Mark's smile faltered but quickly returned to its ingratiating charm. "Samantha," he declared, clearly relishing the attention. She replied, anger bubbling over. "You're turning a workplace disagreement into a social media event." The crowd shifted, intrigued by the confrontation. Mark feigned confusion. Raising awareness, she shot back, adrenaline coursing through her. She could feel the support of the onlookers, their eyes glancing from her to him like a pendulum. Mark replied defensively, although she detected a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Personal, you're the one playing the martyr for attention. You want sympathy for being interrupted." The murmurs among the crowd grew louder. The photographer's cameras clicked with renewed vigor, capturing the escalating tension between the two of them. Samantha stepped forward, her heart racing. "You're not just damaging your reputation, you're damaging ours." Mark's bravado began to crack. He glanced at the crowd, perhaps worried about losing his carefully crafted image. "No, what's not fair is you taking advantage of this moment to play the victim instead of addressing your own shortcomings," she pressed, her voice steady. For a brief moment, his confident facade wavered, and she saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. She pressed her advantage, determined to fully uncover the truth beneath the glittering surface he had constructed. "You can't just keep using your feelings to avoid accountability," she challenged, feeling the tide of the crowd shift in her favor. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The reality that he had been caught, his manipulation, lay bare-settled over the crowd like a thick fog. "Let's be real here," she continued, her tone lowering, gravely serious. In that moment, a ripple of agreement bounced through the onlookers. They were no longer passive observers. They had become part of the unfolding narrative, one that had the potential to reshape their office culture. Mark's confidence eroded further. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he stammered, his bravado completely lost. "Pressure, we all face it, Mark," she replied, the energy swirling around her like a storm. "But using it to manipulate situations will only backfire." His bravado was punctured. The crowd murmured, sensing the vulnerability behind his confounded expression. With that, she turned and walked away, empowered by the catharsis of the confrontation. Each step felt liberating, and she knew she couldn't let his actions define her. Back at the office, things had changed. Colleagues whispered, most filled with admiration and support. It felt like she had sparked something larger than she had anticipated. Conversations began to buzz about workplace dynamics, and she became a focal point for discussions on assertiveness and respect. But despite the exhilaration of the moment, she knew Mark wouldn't let this end quietly. Unbeknownst to her, the real implications of their public confrontation were just beginning to unravel. A few days later, she found herself called back into HR. The weight of uncertainty settled in her stomach as she entered the brightly lit space. "Samantha, we received numerous concerns following the incident," the HR manager began, looking seriously at her. Her heart sank. "Has he now? What a surprise," she replied sarcastically, crossing her arms. "This isn't a joke. We take these matters seriously," the manager continued. As she launched into her account, detailing the events leading to the confrontation, she felt a mix of vulnerability and strength. She was reclaiming her narrative, but Mark had already twisted the situation into something else entirely, and now she felt trapped in a web of his making. Samantha emerged from the HR meeting shaken but determined. She couldn't let Mark's manipulations derail everything she had worked for. Hours later, she received an unexpected message, a link to an article that had gone viral. Her stomach dropped. The very world she had fought to break free from now threatened to ensnare her further. The article painted her as an aggressor while praising Mark as a champion of employee rights. He was turning the conversation upside down, and she felt the threat looming larger than life. Overwhelmed, she scrolled through the comments, people praising Mark, fueling the sense of victimhood he had embraced. She could feel dismissive comments aimed at her. They felt like daggers piercing her confidence. In the days that followed, the narrative twisted further. What was meant to be empowerment morphed into a shadow game of perceptions. Whenever she entered the office, eyes turned toward her with an air of suspicion, casting her as the villain in this spiraling drama. But one evening, after a long day filled with whispered conversations and sidelong glances, Samantha found herself at a crossroads. She sank into her chair, the dim light of the desk lamp casting a soft glow around the residual paperwork. The weight of the world fell heavily upon her shoulders. In that moment of vulnerability, a flicker of anger ignited within her. No longer could she be the quiet observer in Mark's twisted narrative. The facade he had constructed needed to be dismantled, and she was going to do it. With newfound fire in her belly, Samantha opened her laptop and began drafting an open letter. Each word flowed out, sharpened by purpose and determination. She spoke not only about her experience but also of the collective strength within their workplace, the need for honesty over manipulation. As she typed away into the late hours of the night, she could feel the tide shifting within herself. Ready to rewrite the narrative, she pressed send, the words feeling like a battle cry echoing through the twilight. Her heart raced as she closed the laptop, a sense of liberation washing over her. But even as she stepped into bed that night, she knew the confrontation wasn't over. Tomorrow she would face Mark again, but this time she would do it on her terms. And as sunlight poured into her room the next morning, she realized it wasn't just her fight anymore, it was so much bigger than that. The stage was set for the showdown. They both needed a confrontation, not just for her, but for anyone who had ever felt silenced. Tomorrow, everything would change.